In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to remotely connect to your Raspberry Pi. I would first like to say that I don't take credit for any of this and simply found the information online. elinux.org was a great help. By doing this, you can configure your Raspberry Pi without the need of a monitor, keyboard, or mouse. All you need for this to work is a power supply to your Raspberry Pi and a network connection to it. This can be wired or wireless as long as the computer you're using is on the same network. There are two ways of accomplishing this. One allows for remote connection to a command line only and will be suitable if you are a Linux user. The other allows for remote desktop, which allows you to see a graphical user interface. The first step involves retrieving the IP address of the Raspberry Pi once you have attached it to your network. You can attach a monitor to your Raspberry Pi and run the IP adder command to retrieve network information such as MAC address and IP address. This will be required since your Raspberry Pi will receive an IP address from the DHCP server on your router and you have no way of knowing what it will be. There is a way to retrieve the IP address without having to go through the process of needing a monitor and input devices being attached to your Raspberry Pi. To do this, I simply open up a browser, type in the IP address of my router or default gateway, log into it, input my username and password, Once I am logged in, on the right side of the screen, I'll look for a tab that says Attached Devices. In this tab, it will display the devices that are currently attached to my network, and here you'll see the Raspberry Pi is attached with IP address 192.168.0.6. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how you get your IP address of your Raspberry Pi without the need of a monitor and input devices. I cannot guarantee that this will work for everyone, as not everyone will have the same router as I do, and different routers will have different capabilities. If yours doesn't have this capability, you can simply just retrieve the IP addresses I mentioned before by plugging in a monitor and input devices to the Raspberry Pi. Now that we've gotten the IP address, we can connect to it remotely over the network. In this next step, you will need to download some kind of client software into your computer. I will be using PuTTY since that is what my school, Century College, uses to get into their routers and switches. You should be able to download most of these software for free. Google is your best bet here. To connect to your Pi, you simply open up the client program, enter the IP address of the Raspberry Pi onto this line, make sure this is an SSH connection and port 22 is selected. From what I read online, most of the Raspberry Pi's OSs should by default have an SSH daemon already running and listening at port 22, so no initial configuration of the Pi is needed for this to work. Open the connection and it'll prompt you for a login and password. The default Raspberry Pi pass or username should be Pi and password should be Raspberry. And that is how you get into your Raspberry Pi to the command line. Now that we've logged into our Raspberry Pi remotely, what you want to do is set a static IP address to the Raspberry Pi, because you don't want the DHCP server to later on assign a different IP address to the Raspberry Pi and you not know it. So what we're going to want to do is get into a root user, and there's a file in etc interfaces network. Interfaces that we're going to want to edit. And what you want to do is comment out this line right here and add these lines into it. Then what you want to do is specify the address that you want the Raspberry Pi to have. And I'm going to choose 15. And specify your default gateway. And your subnet mask. And your broadcast address. Save the file and exit. Then we want to run this command to reinitialize the interfaces. That should change the IP address from .6 to .15. In this next step, we will be connecting to the GUI of the Raspberry Pi. This will involve a little bit more configuration than before, but it's still easily done. First, you will need to attach your Raspberry Pi to the monitor, keyboard, and mouse. Once it starts up, you will enter the initial configuration page, which will ask you to specify certain criteria, such as if you want to overclock, which keyboard layout you want, what memory split to allocate, and so on. One of the options, though, will ask you if you want to boot to the command line or to the GUI. And for this to work, you must choose GUI. If you don't, then you just get a blank screen when you try to connect. Once you set the initial configuration, you can go back and configure the Pi remotely. You need to log into the Pi and get into a root user. Then you want to get an application called xbmc server, and the command to get that would be and we'll wait for this to unpack and yes. Install. Once it's done installing, I'm going to clear this screen just to get a cleaner look. And we want to start VNC server by running the command type VNC server. Then it will ask you to input a password. This will be the password you need to log in remotely. And you can choose whatever you want. And it asks for a view-only password, which I'm not going to put because I don't want to just view. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to specify the resolution of our remote desktop. We can do so by running this command here, or create a script so that we don't have to type this out every single time. And I'm going to create a script. And you can call the script whatever you want, but we'll call this one svnc.sh. Add these lines to it. And save it and exit. and set this file to execute. Set it to run. Next, we will need to make sure that VNC server is running every time a Raspberry Pi boots up. So we will create a file in let's see, init.d. Call this file VNC boot. And add these lines to the file. Save and exit. I'm going to modify the file's permissions so it can be executed. And enable dependency-based boot sequencing. Then we will need to, after doing this, we will need to reboot our Raspberry Pi. Alright, now that our Raspberry Pi has been restarted, it's time to test our connection. You will need to go online on your client computer and download an application called xbmc Viewer, and it should be free. Just Google it for the download link. So you open up xbmc Viewer, and in the field where remote host is, put in your IP address of your Raspberry Pi, followed by colon and 1 to specify the session. You connect, and it'll prompt for a password, which will be the password we input earlier when setting up xbmc Viewer or xbmc server on the Raspberry Pi. And we have a connection to our desktop of the Raspberry Pi. I did want to point out that this works for Raspian, I know of. I believe most of the other operating systems they offered for the Raspberry Pis, the command line, the one to get to the command line, that should work for most of them. I can't say that the desktop end will work for those guys too. But of course, you know, if you would like to, you can always Google it and find out. This worked for me, and I just used the Raspian OS. So thanks a lot, guys. Take it easy.